I never imagined I'd be standing there at my father's funeral, staring at her with my chest tight and my hands trembling. The room was crowded, but it felt empty, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Everyone else seemed lost in their grief, murmuring condolences, wiping tears, hugging one another, but I could hardly hear any of it. My ears were filled with one phrase, one knife that cut deeper than anything else: "You're out of the will." I had always known our family was complicated, but I thought I understood it. I thought I had some grasp of the balance of love, rivalry, and fairness. But standing there in that polished, sunlit funeral home, with the scent of lilies and old cologne mingling in the air, I realized I had been naive. For years I had believed that my father's love and sense of fairness would protect me, that my quiet diligence and sacrifices mattered, but I was wrong. I saw my sister across the room, her face composed, almost smug. She had always been the favoured one, the one everyone noticed, the one who could charm a room with a single smile. And now, with my father gone, she wielded power I hadn't realised she had been quietly gathering. I forced myself to swallow the lump in my throat. I had to remain composed. People were watching, and any sign of weakness would make this worse. Memories flooded me, sharp and unrelenting. Birthday parties where she got the gifts I secretly wished for. School recitals where my achievements were applauded, but hers were celebrated as though they were our family's pride alone. My father's casual approval seemed to land on her shoulders, leaving me to scrape for crumbs of recognition. And yet I had always tried to keep my dignity intact. I had smiled, worked quietly, learned and planned. As the funeral proceeded, I felt a strange detachment, as though I were watching myself from outside my body. I saw friends and relatives whispering behind polite hands, and I imagined their thoughts. Elena, what a tragedy. They didn't know the real tragedy. Not yet. After the eulogies, the lawyer asked me to come to his study. The house was silent except for the faint echo of footsteps on the hardwood floors. The study smelled like polished wood and leather, familiar and oppressive at the same time. He handed me the will and my heart sank and then rose all at once. I knew the contents before even glancing. My sister's name dominated every major clause. My name, where it should have been, was conspicuously absent. I felt the first real surge of anger mixed with disbelief. How could she? How could she take everything that I had been working toward, that I had dreamed of, that I had silently earned through years of perseverance? I forced my hands to remain steady as I shook the lawyer's hand, thanked him, and left the room. My mind, however, was racing. The wind outside whipped through the trees, scattering golden autumn leaves like memories I couldn't catch. I paused, staring at the swirling chaos. I had been underestimated, dismissed, and pushed aside for years, but now I understood something crucial. The game had only just begun. I had to watch, wait, and plan. 2 weeks. That was all it would take before the truth revealed itself, and the person who had humiliated me would learn, in a way they never expected, that I was not powerless. Even now, I could feel it simmering beneath my skin, a strange mix of fear, anger, and anticipation. The funeral was over, the condolences had been murmured, and the eyes of friends and family followed my every move. But none of them knew what I was thinking. None of them knew the quiet storm building inside me. I walked through the grand halls of the family estate, my fingers brushing against the walls lined with photographs. My father in his prime, my sister smiling in her glory, and me, always a shadow in the background, unnoticed. I felt a surge of determination. If they thought I was weak, if they thought I would let this slide, they were wrong. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't beg. I simply allowed a single thought to take root. I would have my day, and when it came, it would be unforgettable. That was all I had, and somehow it felt both like a lifetime and a heartbeat. Every morning I woke up, I could still see her smug face in my mind, the way she had delivered the words with such casual cruelty. You're out of the will. The memory burned hotter than any flame. I couldn't allow that moment to define me. I couldn't let her think she had won. I spent those days walking the halls of the family estate alone, pretending to the outside world that I was calm, composed, mourning like everyone else. But inside, a storm was raging. I replayed the funeral over and over. Every glance, every whispered comment, every subtle smirk she had thrown my way. I catalogued every weakness, every overconfidence, every blind spot. She thought she had me figured out. She had no idea. I remembered all the times she had underestimated me, how she had laughed at my quiet study habits, my meticulous attention to detail, the late nights spent poring over legal documents and financial reports, while she charmed her way through social events. She had believed that charisma alone was enough to secure her dominance. And in some ways, it had been, until now. My first step was research. I dove into every public and private record I could access: property holdings, corporate filings, investment accounts, legal loopholes. I wasn't just a grieving sister, I was a detective in my own family drama. Every hidden clause in contracts, every unclaimed stock share, every subsidiary she assumed was hers exclusively, each became a potential piece of my counterattack. I also revisited the memories of my father's subtle teachings. While she had flaunted her influence, I had quietly absorbed his lessons: strategy, patience, foresight. He had always emphasized the power of knowledge, of careful preparation, and now, for the first time, those lessons were my weapon. But it wasn't just strategy. The emotional core of what had happened drove me forward. I thought of every night I had spent crying silently in my room, feeling invisible, while she took center stage. Every insult, every dismissal, every sneer, these weren't just slights, they were fuel, and I let them fuel me, shaping the plan that would soon set everything straight. I started contacting lawyers discreetly, arranging consultations under the guise of estate management questions. Every conversation was a delicate dance. I had to probe without revealing my intentions, to learn without tipping her off. Each meeting brought me closer to the realization that I was not powerless. That realization felt intoxicating, a mix of adrenaline and cold satisfaction. Meanwhile, I watched her carefully. The world believed she was in control, basking in the triumph she thought she had won. But I observed her small habits, the way she underestimated employees, the way she overlooked legal formalities, the complacency that comes from feeling untouchable. Every detail was a crack in her armor. And then came the moment that changed everything. A simple, seemingly innocuous discovery. A set of documents my father had hidden years ago, records of shares, trusts, and controlling interests I had never noticed. My pulse raced as I realized the implications. She had assumed total control. But the truth was far more complicated, far more favorable to me. I smiled quietly to myself. The tables were about to turn, and when they did, it wouldn't just be a victory, it would be poetic justice. She had underestimated me. She had laughed at my quiet diligence. She had believed she could strip me of everything. But she didn't know the most important lesson my father had ever taught me. Patience is power, and the quietest player often controls the board. I began drafting my next moves carefully, mapping each step like a chess game. Every conversation, every interaction, every public appearance became part of the strategy. I wasn't just waiting for her to make a mistake. I was preparing to ensure that the moment of reckoning would be unmistakable, unavoidable, and unforgettable. And as I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling of my old room, memories of my father whispering lessons in my ear, I realized one thing. Victory wouldn't feel like revenge. It would feel like justice, and I intended to take it step by step until she and everyone else finally saw that I had been the one holding the real power all along. 2 weeks. That's all I needed. The morning of the reckoning arrived quietly, almost innocently, as if the world didn't know the storm that was about to hit. I walked into the estate, my steps measured, my face calm, my heart a drumbeat of anticipation. Everyone around me assumed I was still the grieving, defeated daughter. No one suspected what I had uncovered, what I had prepared, and how completely the tide had turned. I could hear her voice before I saw her, rehearsing lines, greeting guests with practiced charm, completely unaware of the trap that had been quiet laid. The house, once her domain, suddenly felt smaller, confined, as if it knew it could no longer contain her arrogance. I approached the room where the board and family had gathered. My hands were steady, my voice calm. "I have an announcement," I said, and felt the weight every gaze shift toward me. Her eyes widened slightly. I caught the flash of unease, almost disbelief. She had thought herself untouchable, the queen of the family empire, but I had been playing a game she didn't even know existed. "I've reviewed the estate," I continued, each word precise, deliberate. and the assets, shares, and controlling interests that were believed to belong solely to others actually placed me in charge. There was a collective gasp, subtle at first, then louder as realization spread. She stood frozen, the rehearsed smiles slipping from her face, replaced by the raw, unguarded shock that comes when someone finally sees the truth. And it's not what they expected. I watched as she tried to mask it, to reclaim some semblance of control, but her gestures betrayed her. Hands trembling, a flicker of panic in her eyes. The world she thought she owned was crumbling, not because of any aggressive move on my part, but because of patience, observation, and strategy. The board members shuffled papers, their expressions turning from confusion to recognition. Whispers travelled across the room like wildfire, spreading the news that had been quietly building for 2 weeks. She had been outmaneuvered. I didn't gloat. I didn't yell. I simply stated the facts, calm and unwavering. Every legal document I had unearthed, every hidden trust, every clause that had been overlooked, each was a nail in the coffin of her assumed dominance. And then it hit her, the full magnitude of what had happened. Her shoulders slumped ever so slightly, her breathing shallow. She realized that all the power she had flaunted, all the victories she had assumed, had been illusions. The quiet one, the one she had dismissed, underestimated, and humiliated, was the one holding the real keys. For a moment I almost felt pity, but I pushed it aside. There was no room for emotion now. This was justice. Poetry in motion. Years of subtle oppression, belittlement, and dismissal were being corrected in a single breathtaking revelation. The room was silent except for the rustle of papers and the soft exclamations of astonishment. Eyes turned to me, some in disbelief, some in admiration, and I realized how far I had come. The sister who had tried to erase me from her world had only illuminated my path to true power. I stepped back, letting the shock settle like a storm over the room. No one spoke. The silence itself was a victory, echoing louder than any applause. My voice, my presence, my patience had won where anger and arrogance had failed. And in that moment, I understood the truth my father had always known and quietly taught me. Strength isn't always loud. Power isn't always obvious. And the quietest, most patient players often hold the board. 2 weeks, that's all it had taken. 2 weeks of planning, observation, and resilience to transform what could have been my defeat into a triumph more complete than I could have imagined. She had cut me out. She had believed she had everything, but she didn't know me, and now the game had ended, and I had won. The days after the revelation were strange, almost surreal. The house, once brimming with tension and unspoken rivalries, felt quieter now, like it was exhaling after holding its breath for decades. My sister avoided me, her eyes darting with unspoken questions, lingering bitterness, and perhaps a hint of fear. For the first time in years, she had to acknowledge that I had outmaneuvered her completely. I walked through the estate alone more than ever, observing the shifts in the staff, the subtle changes in the way people greeted me. Where once there had been polite distance, now there was respect, some tentative, some cautious, and a few admiring glances that made my chest swell with quiet satisfaction. It wasn't revenge I felt in those moments, it was the acknowledgement of my own strength and patience. The board meetings were no longer dominated by her arrogance. I watched from my place at the head of the table as she tried to assert influence, only to realize she had none. Every decision I made was deliberate, calculated, and fair. I didn't want to humiliate her any further. Justice had already been served. She had learned her lesson in the most direct, undeniable way possible, by losing control over what she thought was hers. But victory wasn't without its emotional cost. At night, when the house grew silent and the shadows of old photographs seemed to whisper memories of my father, I felt a pang of loss. This wasn't the outcome I had wanted for my family, just the one that circumstances had demanded. I missed my father. I missed the simplicity of childhood before power, manipulation, and betrayal complicated everything. Still, I knew one thing clearly. I had finally stepped into my own. I had claimed what was mine not through brute force, but through patience, intelligence, and an unyielding resolve to never be dismissed again. I had learned that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, waits, and then strikes when the moment is perfect. I also realized something profound about my sister. Her anger and humiliation, while sharp, were fleeting compared to the lessons she would carry with her. I didn't need to watch her suffer. Life itself would be the teacher. And that knowledge, more than any victory, gave me a sense of peace. Family gatherings became quieter, more tentative. People looked at me differently, not with fear exactly, but with acknowledgement of my presence and the fact that I could not be overlooked again. I moved through the world with a new confidence, one that was quiet but unmistakable. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my father's study, running my fingers over the edge of the desk he once occupied, I think about the lessons he left me. Patience, strategy, and the quiet power that comes from observing, learning, and waiting for the perfect moment. I think about how far I've come, and how the 2 weeks that once seemed endless were, in fact, the beginning of something far greater. I smile to myself, not with triumph over her, but with understanding of my own strength. She may have tried to cut me out of the will, to erase my place, to belittle my presence, but she underestimated one thing: me. And that, I realise, is a lesson that lasts far longer than any inheritance. Even now, months later, the echoes of those 2 weeks still linger. People still whisper about what happened. The quiet daughter who was overlooked for years, who suddenly rose and claimed everything she was told she didn't deserve. I hear it in hushed conversations when family gathers, in the subtle respect from colleagues who once ignored me, even in the way my sister looks at me now, cautious, wary, aware that she can never underestimate me again. But it isn't just about the victory. It's about the lessons I carry with me every day. Life has a way of testing your patience, of pushing you to the edge and seeing if you crumble or if you rise. I know now that resilience is not built in moments of triumph, but in moments of quiet preparation, in the unseen hours where no one notices what you're doing, where you learn, grow, and prepare for the moment the world finally sees your strength. I've learned to look at people differently. I see their ambitions, their weaknesses, the little cracks they try to hide. And I've learned to watch myself too, to never allow complacency to creep in, to never assume control without constant vigilance. Power, influence, respect. They are not inherited. They are earned and protected. Sometimes I imagine what might have happened if I hadn't been underestimated, if my sister had played fair from the beginning. Would this story have been the same? Probably not. And yet I don't regret the struggle. Every challenge, every betrayal, every moment of doubt pushed me to become who I am now, a woman who doesn't just survive, but commands, observes, and acts with clarity and purpose. And in the quiet moments when the house is empty and the world feels still, I remind myself, the world often rewards patience more than speed, strategy more than force, and courage more than arrogance. I am grateful, not for the wealth, not for the control, but for the clarity. I understand myself now. I know my power. I know what I can endure. And I know that sometimes the greatest victories are the ones that are never shouted about. They are the ones quietly earned, patiently awaited, and flawlessly executed. And that, I realise, is the story I will carry with me forever. Just when I thought everything had settled, just when the house and the world around me had grown quiet, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. A letter, tucked away in a drawer I hadn't opened in years. My father's handwriting, unmistakable, elegant, and purposeful. I held it carefully, the paper trembling slightly under my fingers. It wasn't addressed to me, at least not directly. It was a note meant for someone who would one day understand the full story, someone he knew would be patient enough to wait and watch. The words inside hinted at secrets even deeper than the will, strategies and plans that had been set in motion long before anyone in the family even knew what was happening. For the first time in months, I felt a shiver, not of fear but of anticipation. My father had left me more than an inheritance. He had left me a challenge, a puzzle, a path to uncover truths even he had carefully hidden. And I realised the story wasn't over, not even close. I folded the letter, tucking it safely into my pocket, and smiled. The quiet daughter, the underestimated one, had not only claimed what was hers, but had also inherited a legacy far more complex than anyone could imagine. Sometimes I think about my sister, the look on her face when she realised she had been outmanoeuvred. I wonder if she suspects there's more yet to come. Probably not. And that, I think, is the most powerful lesson of all. Never underestimate the one who waits, observes, and understands that the game is never truly over, because the truth is, it's only just beginning.